Hello, everyone. So I am Ben. This is Naomi, and part of the talk is from paper to product, what to do next with the cool library you've created. So hopefully we'll go through some ideas of not just if you have a library and you want to publish it up, but then how you can kind of go out to people and start using this in the world. So just a quick little bit about ourselves. So I did my PhD at Queen Mary University in London alongside Naomi, and as part of that, we were in the networks group there. I built a tool called Raphtory, and this is a tool for temporal graph analysis, which we can come into a little bit in a second. But I was kind of interested in sort of not just putting this on a shelf once we'd published a couple of papers, and wanted to kind of get it out there and see if it was actually useful to people. So as part of this, we got some funding from the Alan Turing Institute as part of the Tools, Practices and Systems track, where they were trying to take sort of open source research tools and bring them in front of industry members that may have some use for it internally. Alongside this, I've founded which was a group from researchers from my university and friends that I had made previously to develop an enterprise version of Raphtory. So this was sort of making it production ready and able to push into people's stack and not just totally fall over.
So, my name's Naomi. It's really nice to be here. I also did my PhD at Queen Mary University of London in the networks group there, which is where I met Ben. And I'm now doing a postdoc with the Queen Mary University and also the Alan Turing Institute. During my PhD, as part of my main project, I developed a code base called FETA, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. And right now in the postdoc, I'm developing and using Raphtory for some research use cases as well. And as a little bit of the work with FETA that's still continuing now, I'm doing some consulting with the UK government agency using FETA there, and we'll also tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. So the things that we're going to cover in the talk today is firstly a little bit about our projects, Raphtory and FETA, sort of how they turned from just research code that we've written for one or two of us to something that could be more widely used. Going to look at the idea of open source and some routes for doing this, pros, cons, pitfalls, and how to build up a community around it. It's going to talk a little bit about funding for software research, because it's something that definitely was a little bit new for me when I was looking into this. Some consulting routes, which is another great opportunity to do something while you're doing your PhD or academic work. And finally, Ben's going to talk about some enterprise routes with how he created Pometry and the journey of that. So another thing that I'd say is that I think each of these topics could be like a huge rabbit hole in itself and could possibly deserve a talk of its own. So we're not going to dive too deep in any one of them, but hopefully just enough to give you a flavour of what sort of routes are available. And hopefully we've got like 5-10 minutes at the end, might be able to discuss a bit more.
Yeah, so to kick off, we can go over a little bit of what Raphtory and FETA are and or were. So as an overview of Raphtory to start, it was the first platform that's kind of been taken a bit further to build large temporal graphs. And the first component of this that we were interested in is kind of being able to attach data from anywhere and pull data into a graph model. So this could be some local data you have on your laptop, maybe some CSVs, a database, etc. Or it could be something up in the cloud, maybe an S3 bucket. It could be a Kafka stream, some underlying information that you can pull tuples out of. And as long as that data has a set of entities and relationships that these share, we can convert these into updates and then build that into a distributed temporal graph model. And what I mean by that is all of the nodes and edges that you have a set of properties, and then you have a full chronological history that's inside of those. So you can say, what did the graph look like yesterday, a month ago, a year ago, and then compare and contrast those versions. We then expose an endpoint for users to say, I want to run this algorithm with these time parameters, or to include sort of time series analysis inside of your algorithms, things like temporal shortest path, etc., and then run that on the graph that you've established. So to give you a bit of a flavor of some of the analysis that we've worked on, I promise I'm not obsessed with apes, but there's some more apes in the form of NFTs. This isn't some elaborate plan, by the way. This is total accident. So some analysis that we've been doing in the NFT space is on pump and dump scams. So when people are trying to make things look very valuable so that some unfortunate soul buys it and then they all disappear. And for this, inside of Raphtory, we built a bipartite network of NFTs and wallets. where you see a set of wallets continuously purchasing the same NFT over and over again. So the premise here is that A will sell to B will sell to C will sell back to A, and every time they buy it, the amount of money goes up. So A buys it for $1, $10, $100, $1,000, and then some poor soul comes along and goes, wow, this is selling really well, the value is going up and up and up, I'll have a little bit of that myself. And then as soon as they buy it, all these wallets that were probably controlled by the same person, they disappear. No one's interested anymore. And the unfortunate dumpee is now left with a quote-unquote artwork, which is now worthless. So we are interested in much, much larger cycles, not just free nodes, but maybe multiple hundreds of wallets, and scams that can involve a variety of NFTs. So it could be not just singular one, but they're doing this on tens, maybe hundreds. And we were looking at ways that we could detect sort of patterns, to allocate risk scores and discern sort of genuine interest from scams. And the interesting thing here is from the perspective of the NFT, I don't know if any of you have run a cycle detection algorithm, but they tend to explode very quickly. We can actually order all of the transactions chronologically and then just do a linear search through those to find any cycles. Because as soon as if you see A once and you see A again, then great, we found a cycle. And so a little tidbit of the sort of output that Naomi actually found in this case is that the cycles that we found, so if you look in terms of actual duration in days, the ones that are like almost 1 day or less than under 1 day have the most appreciation in value, so go from like $0 up to 60,000 in some cases, and involve like 200 wallets. So this is a little suspicious. You probably wouldn't expect this, and this may well be the case of people doing this on purpose to run scams. That's kind of some of the stuff that we do in Raphtory. So a little bit about FETA, which my code base is, whereas Raphtory is more about analyzing temporal graphs, FETA is about modeling evolving networks, so how do these networks form? And what you can do with FETA is, if you take a graph model, such as say like the Barabasi-Albert preferential attachment, or some of these other classical network models, we have a method in FETA for, if you then have a data set where the times of all the nodes and the links arriving, you can output a likelihood of that model, which means that you can fit these network models, maybe ones that have parameters, to different temporal network data sets, and also generate some synthetic networks from those different models. And there was my supervisor who thought of the acronym for this, of it being FETA. So a little flavour of how this is being used today in some of the workflows is often the case it can be hard to get hold of network data because of it being sometimes different network data sets can be quite sensitive and so won't be released. What our idea is to, if that network data set is somewhat temporal in nature, we can take some different network models, like sort of random attachment, triangle closure, preferential attachment, do some analysis in FETA to find which is the sort of quote unquote best model for that data. And then from this, what could be potentially released to the public is maybe a maximally likely model of synthetic networks that are realized from that. And the nice thing about this would be that then the network data set would be able to stay private with the person who owns it, as well as the analysis that they've done in FETA. But then this sort of thing can be released to the public with containing much less information than the original network, and would potentially be nice for unlocking lots of data sets in network science. So as I think possibly most of you might be doing their PhDs at the moment or at different stages of the research career, this section is going to be about what you might experience while you're doing these projects, and the idea of potentially open sourcing your code as an initial route. So something that I definitely experienced early on in this process is the kind of route to making a paper on something is first you have some cool idea or a methodology, and you probably might end up having to write some code to do either implement that, do some cool things. Then you've done some analysis using that code through some cool results and write a paper about this.
then we can publish the paper and forget about the code that generated and never touch it and never touch that again. But sadly, that often means that lots of code that was written for a paper doing something potentially really cool might just sit on a shelf somewhere and never be used again. And definitely both myself and Ben were thinking it's a shame that that is often the case, and we'd like to do something a bit more with the code that we've written. And the first route that you might look to do that, and I would encourage you to look into, is the idea of open sourcing your work. And it's a word that's thrown about a lot, and it does have sort of different definitions, which Ben will maybe go into a little bit later. But the general idea of open source is that the code from it should be freely available somewhere. You know, people don't have to ask you to access it, and redistributable, so that people can take that code, build something on top of it without any restrictions. That's, I'd say, the most sort of general premise of open source. So some avenues for doing that, to push your code into open source. There are different ones, and some might make more sense for your project than others. First one I'd say is a great starting place, is just releasing the code onto GitHub. It can feel, I definitely, in some of my first early coding, because my background wasn't in computer science, felt a bit self-conscious about the code that I've written. There's some, it's kind of hacked together. Oh, do I really want to expose, push it out there? But I think just having it there available for people to use is a great thing. And as you invest more, have more time to work on it, adding in a little bit of documentation, even if it's just a quick start example, or an example use case can be enough for quite a lot of cases. Another cool route, which I think is good to explore, is the idea of taking an existing open source library, and if you have perhaps an algorithm that you've written that would work in there, that might be a good route. If you, as an example, if you write a network algorithm, you could contribute that to Network X, and this is really nice because you can usually these. When you make a pull request with some code that you've suggested, this gets reviewed, your code can improve, and then people can use it quite easily. And yeah, it's just a good way of getting out into the community. And final ways that could be good is releasing it as a library in Python or Java, whichever code language it makes sense for. So there's, for example, pip is a Python package manager, and this can be have a little bit of higher barrier to entry in that, say, I think we were finding with Conda that you have to show that the code works on different operating systems and things before it can go out there. But it's if you can get to that stage, maybe later on in the project, it's great because usually the installation is a bit easier for new users. And some reasons why open sourcing is a good idea, as well as just generally the concept of open science being quite a good thing, is having your projects on GitHub or contributing to different projects gives you something that's verifiable in the experience you have with the project if you are looking for a career, whether that be in academia or industry. And something that's been personally really useful is that a lot of these processes in collaborating in large software projects can really help you improve your own programming. So in Raphtory, for example, if you add a new feature, it has to be reviewed and approved by one other developer. And this is really nice because there were some coding practices that were maybe okay if you're just one person working on your own code, but you realise that might not work for bigger projects or things. So I think my own programming is improved as a result. If you're writing papers and things, it's always a good idea to put your code out there so that people, and make it as easy as possible to use it, because if people are writing a similar paper, want to compare your results, then having something that's easier to use will probably make someone more likely to cite. On the other side of that, I think Ben had an experience where he wanted to implement someone else's his code as a comparison and was actively told to go away by that person. So it's much nicer to be able to use that openly.
They use some more explicit language than that, actually.
That's true, yeah. And then also you can generally contribute to improving the state of the art. There's lots of times where I might look and think like, oh, how did this person deal with this numerical thing that explodes with this particular method, and that it's nice to be able to see people overcoming problems similar to your own. As well as along the journey, getting new users means that they often might either add features themselves to the code or suggest ways to improve it. So that feedback is always really, really nice and helpful. And I think probably a lot of the projects that you might be using tend to be open source, like NetworkX, iGraph, GraphTool. So there's a lot of places to sort of take inspiration from in that sense as well.
So I guess a lot of the things that we've talked about to a degree in that is about finding new users and kind of building up this community. And some of that can seem a little bit daunting. It certainly was for me. I quite like the idea of sitting in my room programming away and not really talking to anyone about what I was doing. But as we'll come on to in a second, it actually turned out that all the ideas that I come up with are terrible, and there was an awful lot of better ideas out there. So we wanted to do a little bit on how so you can start going about your community. And the first one is obviously start small. You don't necessarily need to talk to the world. So if you have a couple of co-authors that worked on the project with you, obviously start with them, then work out to your larger lab. So if people in your space are working on a similar problem, say to them, hey, you know, the algorithm you've written, you could rewrite it in my library. Why don't you see how it works there? You know, that allows you to get some of the quick start going and get things working properly. Once everyone in your lab is convinced, if you're a teacher or if you're teaching a course or you have some students underneath you, then you can abuse them and force them to use your code, as I'm sure some of you may have experienced being on the other side. So now the shoe's on the other foot and it's your turn to give it a go. So, you know, if you're teaching a course, you can like do that with your library in mind, set some coursework around it, or if you have like a master's student that's starting to work on a project, they can obviously work on a use case in and around your tool. We've certainly had quite a few of those. Past that point, I mean, people used to make mailing lists, maybe not so much anymore, but I'm sure all of you have perhaps used Slack or Gitter, sort of community spaces that people can ask questions, can form sort of separate sub-projects, and generally feedback to you, to other developers, and to you know, have a good idea of where to go if there is a question to be asked. If you do push things up on GitHub, which I would recommend, or some alternative to GitHub, people tend to log issues there, you know, open pull requests, and you can have a much larger communication there. And obviously, if you have lots of issues open, you have lots of conversation going, people feel much more confidence in actually submitting something themselves. So sometimes we even leave issues open a little while just so it looks like the project's busy. And then obviously, if you've been to hackathons before or you haven't, these tend to be fantastic. So you can go along to hackathons with your tool in mind. Or you can actually, if you've got some funding maybe from the university or somewhere else that you're involved in, set up a hackathon, have some projects in mind for people to come along and give things a try. And these tend to be fantastic spaces, especially to find bugs, because everything always goes wrong whenever everything is running live. That's meant to be animated, but my head can hide it. So, so as an idea of how this happened with Raphtory, to give you a bit of an idea. So when I first built this with my advisor, I don't know if any of you have used Spark or Storm. It doesn't particularly matter, but we built an extension on top of these for Raphtory to work with. This was absolutely dire. Literally no one used it. Then we rebuilt it as its own framework on top in Scala, which is a programming language similar to Java, on top of a library called Akka. This was a lot more successful. I had got some initial users, and we found that it didn't scale at all, totally fell over. So we rewrote it on top of a message brokering system called Pulsar, which is similar to Kafka. Again, total disaster. And then finally, fourth time was kind of the charm, where all of the sort of logic for Raphtory is in Scala, and then we've written a Python library on top of that, so that it interacts with a host of sort of nice tools. So all the ones that Naomi was previously talking about now interoperate with Raphtory nicely. And we found at that point, okay, cool, like I can do some nice temporal graph analytics in Raphtory, pull that into a pandas data frame, and then go back to my usual tools. So this is, we found, this has been really nice. The community's been growing a lot around it, and it's led us to actually open source a load more stuff. So inside of Pometry, we had a sort of internal graph model that allowed us to scale up quite large, built on top of Apache Arrow. I'm just throwing names out there at this point, but if you have heard of them, I can answer questions on them as well. This is the sort of, we can dive into this deeper for what you're interested in aspect of it. But this is all now going open source so that more and more people can use the tool without having to sort of pay for different aspects of it. On top of this, kind of like we've been focusing purely on Raphtory being a library, but what you may experience when people start to talk to you about your tool is they say something like, hey, can you like build a UI on top of this? Can I use it in this context? Or I want to go super vertical. So you might want to say, okay, my library is open and out there, but I'm working on this particular use case, and that's kind of what I'm selling, as we'll come on to in a minute. And even at our stage, I don't really know what the future holds for Raphtory. A lot of decisions get made all the time and things get changed around. This may be an old SpongeBob reference for those of you that have watched it. So even like at the stage that we're at, it's absolutely like, up to the future of what may happen. So if you have to change your project several times, it takes loads of different forms depending on how people are interacting with it. Don't worry about it, kind of roll with the punches and see where it goes. And we did also want to touch on open sourcing tends to sound great, but what's the catch? What can go wrong? And the obvious thing that can go wrong is someone steals your code, which depending on who you ask, that may be the exact plan. So when we've done a dry run to our advisor, Richard at Queen Mary, he's like, fucking A, I've been trying to get people to steal my code for my entire career and, to run that while I've been running. So that's fantastic. But obviously be aware that if you are putting something out there, someone may take it and use it. This can have unforeseen circumstances depending on what you're planning to do in the future of your code. So as a kind of an extreme case of what can go wrong here, has anyone heard of the platform Elasticsearch? So it's a very popular document store. It's used all over the place. They had tens of thousands of users, and it was all free and open. If you wanted a cloud version, so like a sort of SaaS offering, you'd go and speak to the guys who make it, and they'd sort all that for you. Unfortunately, so this was all open. Along came Mr. Bezos, who spun up a huge team inside of Amazon, who got Elasticsearch, put this up on AWS, and then all of their customers started to just go straight to Amazon because, oh, well, I just log in, it's already there, no problems. So what they ended up having to do was say, most things are open. However, if you want to run this on cloud, if you want to have like a business deployment, come and speak to us. And they had to cut Amazon out of the deal. So this is technically a closed source project, even though that most of the code is open and available, which kind of raises the point that when people talk about open source, you might just think, okay, everything needs to be out there and available, but there's actually a variety of different licenses. So this is actually from a website called Choose Your Open Source License, where they go into all the different varieties of things that you can have. So it's well worth, if you're thinking about this, to delve into, okay, what actually makes sense for me? And obviously this can change. So, if you fork or if you create a new version of your project, this can have a totally separate license. You can keep things private for a little while, push them out later. This is all up for discussion inside of your community and the people that work on the tool. Back to Naomi.
So the next thing is perhaps you've decided that, yeah, I actually really want to work specifically on the code that I've generated and find some funding for improving this. And the sort of good news for a lot of software projects is that there can be funding specifically for those or as part of a wider research project, which I think for interdisciplinary areas is particularly good news because these traditionally have been that hard to get funding for, especially in the UK. So there are different academic routes, firstly. So a lot of traditional funding routes in this way have what's an impact factor associated with them. So is a case for, say, UK EPSRC grants or EU proposals. And being able to say there's software that can be used by many people, that's great for supporting a grant like that. And there are also some calls that are specifically focused on software and tools. So an example of this is with the Raphtory project that's funded by the Alan Turing Institute on a track called Tools, Practices and Systems, entirely just for software and development of it. Another interesting place to look is government funding calls. And my only experience of this is from UK government funding, but I imagine, I hope that there might be similar initiatives within your own country to look at. So one is that I know of in the UK is called a KTP, Knowledge Transfer Partnership, where it funds a researcher to work sort of short term with a company on a particular project that they have. potentially publishing on there. And the extension to this is called Innovate UK, where you have a company partner and an academic partner working on a project together for that might be about a few months or a year, and that can is the hope is that company and partnership can be successful and potentially boost the economy with tax things. And then there are sometimes specific funding calls for smaller grants, like there was one recently in the UK called Refrain, which is all about online harms, privacy, things like this, and those are really good for software specific things. So the next route I'd like to delve into is around a little bit of personal experiences, consulting. And I think a good first step is just knowing that this is an option, because it's something I didn't really think about all during the PhD for me. So consulting often involves working with a client on some sort of short, concrete deliverables. So they have a problem, and perhaps if you have a project that might help solve it, or things you can work for a short time on these. And it's something that's generally done sort of alongside your day-to-day work, rather than full-time necessarily. And these tend to also have a slightly shorter time frame than academic projects, so it might just be something like a few months working someone. And for me, it's been a great way of getting to see work getting implemented in a commercial setting, because I don't know about you, but sometimes when I've been working on the early days of FETA, it can feel sort of quite abstract as a thing, and so getting to see it bringing that immediate use is really quite satisfying. And one thing I'd really recommend is also I saw, I think it was last year or the year before, Massimo did a really great talk on consulting as an option, and I think if you are seriously considering it, would massively recommend checking it out. So how do you get started in consulting? And this can be quite overwhelming as a thing. One option is to go completely independent and set up your own company. And Ben will talk a little bit more about the actual setting up a company and what's involved in that. Another approach might be to go through an umbrella company. So in the UK, a popular one's called Churchill Knight, and the idea is that they will look after all the taxes, accounting side of things, and employ you looking after that. And another route is also through the university. So commonly they have maybe some staff directly dedicated to setting up consulting things. And again, we'll look after all the tax and different things that sort of having a company involves. And I think these last two are a great entry point for the first time, because when I was presented with the opportunity, I thought, like, oh my God, how do you even go about this? And they look after all this side of things and writing the contracts themselves, but it's worth knowing that they take a little bit of a cut or a fee for doing this, and it depends a bit from which company or university is involved. Perhaps the bigger question with consulting is actually how do you get your first sort of consulting client or gig, and this can be again quite overwhelming because of when I was doing my PhD, I was interacting mainly with other PhD students, academics. How do you even find the people who might be looking for researchers to work on things? And there's not really a simple answer to this, but something that was really helpful for us was seeking out some cross-industry and academic events. One thing that sometimes universities do is maybe an industry talks event where they invite numbers of representatives from companies to come in and listen to some research talks. And then also the Joint Institute did this cool AI UK Day where it was a mixture of talks from sort of academic and industry aimed at sort of linking people up for this sort of partnerships. And also looking for some non-academic meetups and things in your local area where you can chat to other people either in academia or industry working on your sort of wider problems. A cool one, which is I think applicable outside the UK and in Europe, is data beers. This is really nice chilled event where you can meet people working in data science in general. Highly recommend. But there's also a fair bit of luck involved in this, not just happening to be in those conversations where you can be introduced. So to give a little overview of my experience of taking the FETA project and doing a little bit of consulting with this was first, it was a project with me and my advisor. I'd done really well, and we didn't want to shelve it. We published a paper on this, and we pushed it to GitHub, all the code that we'd written for it. And as part of this, it had been initially just the two of us using it, so there's lots of weird quirks to the software and like random weird variable names, and it probably wasn't a very nice user experience if you come in from as an outsider to using it. So we proposed it as a student project for some of the students working with Richard and myself as something that they could use to learn about network models and do some projects on that. But that was a great process because it lots of them said, we're getting this random bug, it won't run on my computer, this thing happens. So loads and loads of bugs were fixed as part of that process, and some of them added new features in. And then through our connection with Raphtory, actually at the Island Sharing Institute, we had a couple of talks on sort of synthetic data, and where we talked a little bit about FETA and built up some contacts in there. And I've ended up working with an agency at the UK government who were interested in this problem of generating synthetic networks when you have a sort of sensitive network data set to start with. And this is now sort of an ongoing consulting project using FETA, and has been a really nice experience for us because as part of it, we had to add some new features to it, like having networks where the edges have types, and the UI is improved a bit and improved the speed, which normally I think if we didn't have something actively to work on like consulting, we might not justify the time to make those improvements.
Yeah, so then the sort of alternative to this is that once you've kind of got a project in mind, you can have a look at converting this into your own company. And I put these hashtags on here because normally you find that people who talk about this have things like entrepreneur in their Twitter bio, and it's a little bit cringy. And so I'm trying to avoid a degree of that, but it probably will still come off that way. So if it does, I apologize. It's definitely not the intention. So the first question I tend to get is like, how on earth do I actually start a company? Like, I know that companies exist and people exist. What is the kind of interaction between them? And at least in the UK, the way that this generally works is there's a group called Companies House, which register all England and Wales-based private enterprises. You send them £25, and they send you a company. And that's about it, really. Which is a little bit facetious, but that's generally the process. And then after that, you are now a director, and you have a lot of responsibilities. And then that kind of comes to the questions like, oh my God, what on earth do I do now? Am I going to go to prison if I do something wrong? You know, there's all these things that start rushing through your mind. And there's kind of like, well, what are the actual steps? Like, so if I go and speak to someone, I tell them that I run this company and I want some money from them. You know, like how do we sort of engage in this sort of business practice without me coming across like a total idiot? There's obviously pitfalls, like if I don't do my taxes properly, you know, there's some man bursts down our door and takes us away. That's not great. And I kind of had this idea that, do I need to change my mindset in some capacity? Like, I have an academic hat on, I am a PhD student, I live in this ivory tower, how do I become a businessman? And I had absolutely no idea about any of these things. So the kind of step zero, which you might have seen before, and I very much recommend, is to look up some startup accelerators. And so some ones that you may have seen online is Y Combinator. So these run the Hacker News forum, and Creative Disruption Labs, which are all over Europe and America. And the general premise between these is that you go along, you'll get some information about all the things that I've previously seen. They normally set you up with things like a tech coach to productionize your code, and also a business coach of how you can kind of go through these initial steps, getting your first customer and so on. For myself specifically, and for anyone that's in the UK, I'd really recommend Conception X. So they're a startup accelerator specifically for PhDs. So they basically take, like, you've got a cool project that you're working on, and they will then take you on. They take absolutely nothing from your company or money from you, and then they put you through all of these different sort of steps to understand, you know, how you get from where you are now to setting up your company, having your first customer, not going to prison. And they also introduced us to our first set of investors, to a variety of people that are possibly interested in our tool. So generally, good idea to get involved in a startup accelerator, because these also bring back a load of benefits to your lab, which will make you very popular. So as a kind of like theoretical aspect of this, one thing is it allows you to explain deep tech or what you're working on to other people. You'll find that everyone out there has absolutely no idea what you're working on. At least I certainly had no idea of explaining it other than kind of giving them like a 200-page thesis. So it allows you to kind of work out that back of the napkin sale, and your parents and family will really appreciate that over Christmas as well. So that's kind of beneficial. I can now explain it to them. You get an idea of what's the state of the art outside of academia, which can sometimes be woefully terrible. And you'd be like, oh my God, I'm light years ahead of everyone, which is phenomenal. Or you can find the opposite of like, oh my, they've solved all the problems I'm working on. I really need to change the sort of direction that I'm going in. This can very much go both ways. You can find, you know, is your research actually useful to someone? And obviously that might be totally irrelevant, you might not care at all, but it may be something that you're interested in. And then obviously if it is useful, you've created a hammer which you can hit some nails with. Is someone willing to pay you to hit these nails, which would be great. And these sort of relationships that you find may not be sort of physical money that you're exchanging then and there, but you bring them back into the interactions you have with the rest of your group. So from this, you tend to get a lot of free resources. So I think Naomi and I have tallied up something like $300,000 in Amazon credits, which we've burnt through doing stupid shit. But that, you know, that was all free, no strings attached, lots of free legal support and everything that comes through these accelerators and partners that you work with. So that's great. People will be very happy you bringing that back into the group. You find a lot of new contacts. So these people tend to, you know, bring a different perspective to your project or may have different project ideas. And that kind of opens up, there's like new research opportunities. So you tend to find these people might not want to pay you directly, but what they're interested in doing, I go to the next bit, is offer you some funding opportunities. So you can go to your advisor and say, hey, this company I met, they want to give us $200,000 to work on some project for 6 months, to which your advisor says, lovely jubbly, thank you very much. And then, you know, he's very pleased and won't have a go at you for a while. And or the alternative is that maybe they just say, hey, when you've done your PhD, do you want to come and work with us? And you say, actually, yeah, that sounds pretty good. So, you know, it's well worth getting involved in this kind of ecosystem as an initial component of this. However, if you say, you know what, I don't want to do that, I'm going to take the plunge, I'm going to create a company, the kind of question is what's next? And well, it tends to fall into two camps, which you might hear people talk about, which is bootstrapping or funding. And as a very forced analogy of what this tends to look like for people, these horrible animations that Naomi and I created when it was very, very late the other night, which is that by bootstrapping, you're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and you're reaching escape velocity, you make lots of money and you and your friends are very happy. However, what tends to happen is it's bloody hard to do this. You give it a go and you fall over. And you know, kind of you keep on trying to restart this process and get things going, but you need to take up a work on, or you know, you've got your PhD going on, etc. It's a bit of a nightmare. So you find some investors, either angel investors, so individuals, or big sort of corporate VCs, which strap a rocket to your back and make it much easier for you to hire developers, work on your own, and get this all going. The problem with this, however, at least most people's perspective, is that you end up with some guy that looks like this, who's constantly poking you in the side and saying, hey, where's my profit? And if you get enough of a funding round, there tends to be more than one of them. If you speak to the right investors, you tend to find that these people are quite friendly, at least initially, and you can kind of get a good relationship going with them. But this is not something that you need to decide now at all. It's just worth bearing in mind that these kind of options are available. So to give you an idea of kind of Pometry's sort of journey in this regard, I had 3 co-founders. I was doing my PhD in graphs at the time. My friend James was working as a DevOps contractor, so had some experience starting his own company. My other friend Haroon was doing his PhD at UCO in cryptography, and our 4th co-founder was working at a company called Contexa, was as a manager there, and was like both in the development side and in the sales side. So we had a sort of a good understanding across the team, at least of some aspects, which is another point to raise, which is if you have friends in industry or other areas that want to kind of jump in with you on your project, definitely worth exploring. We initially done some bootstrapping, so we spent about 12 months working on contracts, which was good because I was finishing off my PhD at the same time. And as part of this, we actually got a contract to work with a legal firm that had 400 years of legal data that they wanted to build into a big citation network and then do some graph analysis on, which we ended up publishing a paper from. So we sort of somehow managed to like find both of the things working side by side, which is kind of the best case scenario. In a similar case to a lot of the work that Naomi is doing, there's opportunities to publish this as well. So this is a separate aspect of like, again, if you bring this back to your professor and say, hey, I've got a load of money and I published a paper, absolutely amazing. Everyone's very happy. During this process, we talked about 60 VCs, a lot of which just told us to get out of their site, some of which were very interested, and eventually we found two, Crane and the UCL Tech Fund, who were really interested in what we're doing, and we got some initial sort of seed funding from them, and now our team has grown quite a bit, so there's 15 people or so working full-time on Raphtory as part of Pometry, and then we have this kind of growing community around. But this has been happening over a period of about 6 years from the sort of start of the project through to where we are now. The last point I'll raise here before we shut up, because I realize this is a very long and arduous talk, is does this affect the open and closed debate that we were talking about earlier? My flaky answer to that, which I'm totally going to get out of, which is kind of, and it really depends on this idea of product market fit, or what are you selling? So if you have a specific algorithm that you've written and what you're selling is, I'm going to take your data, I'm going to run my secret source algorithm on it and give you the answer back, and probably don't publish that. At least not initially. However, if you're doing, say, like what we're doing at Pometry, which is that you have an open library and you're helping people build cool things on top of it, then that's probably fine. But again, as most of this stuff is here, you don't have to worry about this now. So feel free to push initial ideas out there, get some feedback from people that initially want to use it, and then work out actually what aspect of that are people interested in buying. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and we have a little look at what you should take away, which is you're probably working on something really, really cool, so don't hide it away, definitely show it to the world. And open sourcing is a great way of bringing attention to your work and getting others to use it. There's lots of career opportunities outside of just doing a postdoc, but you can be doing a postdoc alongside many other things, and obviously the general plug of like please give Raphtory and FETA a go, which is the actual secret plan for this whole talk. Nothing, we're not interested in any of this, just to get you to use our tools. That's a semi-joke. So on that point, if you're interested in any of the use cases we talked about, Naomi and I publish everything on the Raphtory blog. They're both up on GitHub, and you can come and chat to us on Slack, or email us directly at us at Twitter, or talk to us at the conference. We're more than happy to go and have many, 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 many beers. Thank you.